The Hidden Hindu, Book 2 of the trilogy by Akshat Gupta, Chapter 2, Legends of the Past. At 10 degrees north, 90 degrees east, around 560 kilometers from Indira Point, the southernmost part of India's territory, a humongous submarine maneuvered its way through the depths of the ocean. The submarine was almost 2 football fields long and as wide as 3-lane highway. 2 steam turbines producing 50,000 horsepower and 4 320 kilowatt turbo generators provided a sailing speed of 41.1144 kilometers per hour on the surface of 53.708 kilometers per hour underwater. This intimidating vessel was maintained and run by a crew of about 100 who worked in shifts. In the common lobby of the submarine, Nagendra was busy plotting a new plan with Premil and LSD. "Set course for the shore closest to Kailash Parbat," Nagendra ordered composedly. He stood up and briskly started walking towards his chamber, indicating that their short meeting was over. Premil and LSD followed and made their way to the command center. They would have to determine the shortest route to Daiga Beach from their present location while evading the Indian Navy. The spontaneous change of route caused a stir of anxiousness within Premil, which made evident as he spoke. Climbing Mount Kailash is forbidden. According to legends and writings, no mortal can summit Mount Kailash, where, among the clouds, is the abode of the gods. He who dares to start the journey towards the top of the mountain and sees the faces of the gods will plummet to death. It is said that the only person to have ever been atop the sacred mountain was Milarepa, and "Do not speak of that scoundrel in front of me ever again." Nagendra's thundering objection to the mention of Milarepa interrupted the rant. Premil shivered in fear, and so did LSD. Nagendra halted abruptly in the lobby before a watertight door made of heavy metal and secured with a sturdy lock. A white signboard spelling "restricted" in bold red made it clear that no other person on the ship was allowed to access the door. The upper part of the door had some mystical symbols and letters engraved on it, as if derived from an ancient language. As Nagendra's arm moved closer to open it, LSD and Premil shared a look before taking a deep breath, bracing themselves for what was coming. An extraordinary and dominant force field radiant from the restricted chamber and the space around them warped as the door was unbolted. An invisible energy entwined them with the roots of an old tree. Their shoulders felt the weight of the entire ocean on them, and a waterfall of tears rolled down their cheeks. The network of blood vessels became etched on the interiors of their skin, appearing thick and webby on their exterior as if they had burst at any moment. While blood poured out of their nostrils and ears, they stood stunned, with their eyes wide open like souls trapped in statues, and could feel their hearts hammering against their rib cage. The blood flow in their veins outran the speed of the submarine. Right before closing the door, Nagendra's brows furrowed as he raised his voice. "I said, take me to the closest shore in Kailash Parbat, not to Kailash Parbat." The door was finally shut, and the spell was broken. Premil and LSD stood there disoriented while the door was bolted from the inside. LSD was sweating profusely. She wiped her face with her shaking palm and turned towards Premil, who had trails of blood going down from his nose and ears, and drops falling on his shirts. LSD frantically took a big tuft of cotton and helped him wipe the blood off. Premil held another piece of cloth to his nose to stop the bleeding. After making sure that Premil was stable, LSD broke the silence. "So tell me more about Mount Kailash." Premil still held the cloth, which was now partially soaked in crimson, to his nose and continued to narrate in a hushed voice. "Mount Kailash is known as Axis Mundi, or the axis of Earth suspended between the celestial poles. The ecosystem naturally regulates itself to create a habitable environment for all living beings. Pilgrims and others who visit the area around the mountain have reported a rapid growth of hair and nails within a span of 12 hours, growth which usually takes 2 weeks under normal conditions. Even in the mountain's vicinity, vicinity, time travels faster, something which is not witnessed anywhere else in the world. The mountain has air that causes accelerated aging. The nosebleed subsided and Primo discarded the cloth carelessly before opening his laptop. He continued to speak. Another profound mystery about Mount Kailash is its geographical position with respect to the Earth's poles and other ancient monuments. It cannot be a coincidence that the distance from Mount Kailash to the North Pole is 6,666 kilometers, 13,332 kilometers to the South Pole, which is exactly twice the distance to the North Pole from the inexplicable reason. Mysteriously, the distance between the Egyptian pyramids and the North Pole is also 6,666 kilometers. Primo flipped his laptop towards LSD. Look at this. LSD was astounded to read what was on the screen. Kailash Parbat to North Pole was 6,666 kilometers. Kailash Parbat to Stonehenge, 6,666 kilometers. Stonehenge to Devil's Tower, 6,666 kilometers. Stonehenge to Bermuda Triangle, 6,666 kilometers. Bermuda Triangle to Easter Island, 6,666 kilometers. Easter Island to Taj Mahal, 6,666 kilometers. As LSD stared at the numbers in disbelief, Primo continued to chant everything he knew about the cryptic mountain. The highest peak of the world, Mount Everest, is 29,029 feet high, and yet its summit has been scaled by more than 4,000 people. Mount Kailash is almost 21,780 feet high, which is 7,251 feet less than Mount Everest, yet numerous expeditions have failed at climbing the mountain. Even with several extensive studies and theories, it is believed that no one could comprehend the true reason why Mount Kailash cannot be ascended, why many attempted and failed despite it being a fairly scalable height for proficient mountaineers. I guess some mysteries are better left unsolved. No matter how intimidating they seem or how elaborate their history has been, there are legends about Tibetan named Milarepa being the only human being scaled the peak of Mount Kailash over 900 years ago. The submarine progressed towards 21.42 degrees north, 87.30 degrees east. Coordinates for Daiga Beach in West Bengal, the coast closest to Kailash Parbat. Primo, being a historian by nature, also set sail to a narrative dating back almost a millennium in time. The life of Milarepa is one of Tibet's most treasured legends. Preserved orally for centuries, we cannot know how much of the story is factually true. Even so, through the ages, Milarepa's life instances have continued to teach and inspire incalculable numbers of Buddhists. This chronicle of Tibet's greatest mystic is a saga of greed, vengeance, demons, magic, murder, and restoration. Milarepa was born in 1052 AD in the village of Kaya Nagatsa, a province of western Tibet. He was named Mila Tofpega, which means a joy to hear. His family was a prosperous one, and his family name Joyce indicated noble descent from the Eagle clan. Topega and his little sister were cherished by villagers. Eventually, his father grew very ill and realized he was dying. Calling his extended family for his deathbed, Topega's father directed that this estate be cared for by his brother and sister until Milarepa came of age and got married. But as soon as he died, Milarepa's aunt and uncle betrayed their brother's trust without a second thought. They divided the property between themselves and disowned Topega along with his mother and sister. Now outcasts, the little family lived in servant quarters where they were given meager food and clothing and were made to labor in the fields. The children were malnourished, ragged, and covered with lice. Those who once showered them with affection were now demeaning them with pleasure. When Topega turned 15, his mother tried to reclaim his inheritance with great effort. She scraped together every last bit of paltry resources to prepare a feast for her extended family and former friends. When the guests had eaten, she stood up to speak, holding her head high. She recalled exactly what her husband had said on his deathbed, and she demanded that Topega be given the inheritance his father had intended for him. But the covetous aunt and uncle blatantly lied that the estate actually never belonged to them, and so Topanga had nothing to claim. They forced the mother and children out of the servant quarters and into the streets. The family resorted to begging and odd jobs to stay alive. The mother had shot for the stars for her Topanga and lost even the broken roof protecting them. Now she seethed with hatred for her husband's family and urged her son to study sorcery. "I will kill myself before your eyes," she told him, "if you do not attain vengeance." Compelled by his mother's vengeful entreaty, Topanga found a sorcerer, a just man who had mastered the black arts and became his apprentice. Initially, the sorcerer taught him only ineffectual charms, but once he learned about and verified the injustice done to Topanga, he diligently passed over to him all his knowledge of secret powerful spells and rituals. Topanga spent a fortnight in an underground cell practicing his lessons in dark magic. When his brief hibernation ended, he learned that a house had collapsed on his extended family while they were gathered at a wedding. The rubble rushed everyone to death except the greedy pair. Topanga deemed it fair that they survived the disaster, as it now gave him a chance to make them confront the ultimate consequence written by their own avarice. His mother gave him the perfect plan. She wrote to her son and demanded that he destroy their crops as well. Topanga hid in the mountains overlooking his hometown and summoned monstrous hailstorms to demolish the barley crops. The villagers suspected black magic and angrily stormed into the mountains to find the perpetrator. Still in hiding, Topanga overheard them talking about the ruined crops. He realized then that he had harmed innocent people in the heat of revenge. Burning with guilt, he repented his actions, traveled in search of another teacher, and eventually his intuition led him to India. No one knows what he did in India and whom he exactly met during those years. It is said that his skin had turned green from consuming only nettle soup. His austerity, dressing it in a white cotton robe, irrespective of how harsh or gentle the weather would be, earned him the name Milarepa, which means Mila the cotton-clad. LSD couldn't wait to tie the story together. If the summit of Kailash Parbat is unattainable, how did they achieve the impossible? I don't know, but it is believed that no one can access Kailash Parbat unless they have a karmic connection with it. Milarepa lamented his wicked past later in life. According to the legend, this is what he said: "In my youth, I committed black deeds. In maturity, I practiced innocence. Now, released from both good and evil, I have destroyed the root of karmic action and shall have no reason for action in the future. To say more with this would only cause weeping and laughter. What good would it do to tell? I am an old man. I want to be in peace." "Maybe the secret behind summiting Mount Kailash has something to do with these words," suggested LSD. "Yes, maybe. But what does Nagrendra have to do with Milarepa?" mumbled Primo. What? Did you say something?" LSD asked, looking confused. "No, I wasn't asking you. Anyway, as the tale goes, he died in 1135, Primo sighed. Confined inside a submarine, Primo's questions about the relationship between Milarepa and Nagrendra was unanswered. But back in Ganganj, Om was about to decipher how Ashwathama and Parashuma learnt of his existence. Ashwathama took Om back to their hut and had woken up. There stood a saint who had green skin and was clad in a white cotton robe. "Meet Milarepa," Ashwathama gestured towards the man, introducing him to Om. Milarepa, the man who had died in 1135, according to historians, was actually hale and hearty in the land of extinct. At this point, Om was ready to hear all about his forgotten identity before he had met Nagrendra in the hut of the great Dunyanvardi. Underwater, Nagrendra sat in his restricted chamber, anticipating the submarine's arrival on Daiga's beach. As Prithvi paused and took his last sip from the bowl, Mrs. Butcher noticed the cold bowl of soup sitting full in her hands. Placing it aside, she asserted there was a third place between the mountain peaks and the ocean bed where crucial discoveries were being made. Dr. Tej Butcher, my husband, had noticed something extremely unusual while examining Ohm's blood sample, which he managed to sneak out when the facility on Ross Island was destroyed. Unlike ordinary blood, which has red and white blood cells, Ohm's sample contained unique black blood cells speckled throughout his blood. Tej decided to put them through the various tests in order to explore the strange discovery. According to his hypothesis, on Ross Island, just like the doubling of lifespan in yeast and mice, Ohm's genes might be altering themselves to counter aging. As predicted, the black blood cells in the sample mutated and cleared the test of longevity. To take it a step further, he mixed it with several infected blood samples. He tested it against Salmonella typhi, bacteria causing typhoid, streptococcus, pneumonia, Vibrio cholerae, Ebola, influenza, and so on. Tej was absolutely stupefied to see that Ohm's blood cells were perfectly immune to all pathogens, resulting in a blood rich with all sorts of antibodies. The absurdity of the situation made it seem as though the black blood cells were mocking Tej and his competence. Instead of considering this revolution a boon disguised as an opportunity, he mistook it for a challenge. Before he knew it, Dr. Tej was at an unsolicited war with the black blood cells and refused to give up. He subjected the blood to 25,000 degrees Celsius, a temperature hot enough to melt iron, and recorded the effect on the sample. Strikingly, the black blood cells fused together to prepare a kind of insulation around the other blood cells and froze themselves in the exact opposite temperature at negative 25,000 degrees Celsius, protecting them from the heat. Tej then subjected the sample to an extremely low temperature, only to find that the black blood cells banded together and worked the opposite way by heating themselves up, this time to neutralize the external conditions, hence keeping the red and white blood cells safe, just the way Parashuma and Ashwatthama were protecting Ohm. But what was Parashuma and Ashwatthama preparing Ohm for? An agitated Mrs. Butcher thought out loud. For his own death, Privy shrugged. Mrs. Butcher's jaw dropped slightly at his nonchalance, but she knew there were no simple answers. She would have to just sit back and wait for Prithvi to complete recollecting what he had seen, no matter how obscure it was to listen to a man speak of parallel events which he wasn't even born to witness. It was 3 a.m. when the submarine arrived at its destination. Prithvi resumed the narrative. Daiga Diga Beach was nearby, and so Premal knocked on the watertight door of the restricted chamber. Nagendra was already prepared with a packed bag and a round metal bottle hanging from his neck when he opened the door before the third knock. The same wrath followed him outside, bringing Mersile's pain to LSD and Premal again. The pain was so excruciating that a crew member crossing the lobby at the unfortunate moment turned to pulp and died immediately. An unfazed Nagendra shoved the pile of death inside the chamber with a swift foot and shut the door, relieving the other 2 survivors from the terrorized form. The submarine tore through the surface of the waters. Primrose boat, which had used at Ross Island, was employed again to drop the team off. Nagendra was the first one to set foot on the shore and started to march away like a horse with blinders, which had nothing but victory in its line of vision. LSD looked back to check on Premal, who was still unloading their bags from the boat. Looking at their tardiness, Nagendra yelled at them in his thundering yet ominous voice. It is a race against time. Time will not stop for me, and I will not stop for anyone. I have only 9 days to reach. Where do we have to be in 9 days? LSD asked with a shaky voice, and she jogged towards Nagendra to keep up. Nagendra handed her a folded piece of an old embossed paper. By the time Premal joined them, Nagendra had started walking again. LSD crouched and opened the paper to see it better. The piece of paper was ripped out of the books of Mritzur Sanjivani, depicting a sea at its right end, mountains on its top, and a red line drawn between them. It was hard to tell which part of the world it was. Premal read the confusion on LSD's face, picked up the glass shard of a broken liquor bottle near him and stared at the outline that could be around the torn part of this map. LSD decoded its strokes with a mystified look before Premil stopped drawing altogether. It couldn't be, Premil thought. It was the map of India that the stray piece belonged to. That little piece was a depiction of the eastern coast of India at one end and the Himalayan range on the other. The red line, which ran from Daiga Beach to the foothills of the mysterious Mount Kailash, was the route they were to trek in the next 9 days. Still concerned by the incomplete knowledge of where they were headed to, Premil and LSD spotted Nagurndha, who had already covered a lot of distance. LSD tucked the map safely in her bag and scurried to catch up to Nagurndha.